So welcome everyone to the Return to Nature with winemaking. So my name's Ellie and I'm from the Festival of Nature. And I'm really delighted today to welcome Frank Mason and Louise Wood from Averys, who are going to talk us through 3 amazing wines. This recording is going to be available afterwards. So if, like somebody just mentioned, you just want to open one of those wines, you can watch this again and taste the other wines at a later date. And the wines are available to purchase as well from the Averys website. So we'll drop a link in the caption as well. So if you are watching this a bit later on, you can still join in later. Right, I'll hand over to you, Frank and Louise. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Frank, that's Louise.
Hello, everyone.
We are from Averys Wine Merchants in Bristol, one of the country's oldest wine merchants dating back to 1793. We're going to chat through the 3 wines that we have selected with a focus on all things organic, biodynamic, natural, vegetarian, vegan, all of these elements within wine that separate it out from conventional wine. But if you've got any questions as we go through, feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll answer as many as we can, and just give you a better understanding as to what extra can happen within the vineyard and within the winery to actually improve the overall quality, style, flavor, taste, and health of the wine. So yeah, we're going to chat through these wines as we go through. So if you do have them handy, do tuck into the Grüner Veltliner, into the white. No need to wait on ceremony on that one. Tuck in and enjoy, and we'll chat through that in just a second. So I'm just going to share the screen with you, if you don't mind. So first off, what is organic wine? So essentially, we are not using any man-made chemicals within the vineyard. We are giving the vine, the soil, the vineyard, the extra care and attention to produce far better quality wine. We tend to find that usually the yield, the amount of grapes that you make per vine is reduced when you convert to organic winemaking. But actually, the quality that you get is far better. I was always told that essentially, it's like tasting wine without your glasses on, if it's not organic, and then tasting organic wine is like putting your specs on. Everything just becomes a little bit more in focus, a little bit purer and more fresher, and it's slightly easier to identify those key characteristics and aromas within wine. So by doing this organic viticulture, we are caring for the vine a lot more. We're not throwing any synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or anything like that into the soil and damaging the environment. We are really caring about what we are trying to make. The difficulties that you have around organic winemaking is that it is much more labor intensive. You do need to care for the vine a little bit more, which does start to increase costs. It is also a lot more achievable within certain areas where it is drier and warmer. In those damp growing conditions, you do need to protect the vine against certain things like downy mildew and powdery mildew, which is usually done through sadly man-made chemicals, what's referred to as the Bordeaux mixture. So yeah, you need to care for the vine a little bit more. The other issue that you have is that you do need to be certified to be organic, and that is quite a costly thing. It is done, that sort of cost is managed as per the size of your vineyard, so it's slightly more reflective as to how much you can actually make. But that certificate is very expensive, and it is an annual subscription as such. You do also need to be practicing as organic for 4 years before you can actually get that certification. So it's kind of thought that after 4 years, the amount of chemicals that you've pumped into the soil beforehand have started to ease up. It is thought that really those chemicals, those residues of the chemicals do last for about 10 years. So 4 years is a fair halfway point. There is a step above organic, which is called biodynamic winemaking. And this is using the same principles as organic wine, but taking into a more physiological thought about what you would do within the vineyard and within the winery. So this is the original sort of Steiner method of doing everything in accordance with the lunar cycle. So you would have certain days that you would do certain things within the winery. And again, this is all a certificate that needs to be monitored year in, year out to make sure that you are doing biodynamic winemaking. So say, for example, you wanted to be organic, but actually that certificate is out of your reach, it's too expensive, or maybe you've had to use a small amount of chemicals just to make sure that you didn't lose your entire crop. There is a kind of a halfway house as such, which is sustainable viticulture. And this is a growing thing throughout the world of wine, where people care for the vine, but they may be in less favorable regions as such. So anywhere where those damp growing conditions are a little bit more obvious. So with that, they're allowed to use some man-made chemicals, but it's more about the preventative method. So caring to the vine a little bit more so that you don't have to heavily spray everything when it rains. If you actually tend to those vines a little bit better through careful canopy management, controlling your yield, making sure that there's good airflow going through the vines, then actually you can mitigate a lot of those issues. But of course, that is still very labor intensive. So with that, the more you do, the more the wine is going to cost, sadly. But at least with this, you don't need a certificate, but it is often listed on bottles because it is still a good stab of approval. And you can see it on the back label of the Grüner that we selected, so sustainable Austria there. So this is a sustainable wine that we're going to be starting with. The other thing that is really encouraged throughout all three of these is increasing that biodiversity within the vineyard. So whether that is having hedgerows around the vineyards just to encourage extra growth, improving more or encouraging more insects and bugs into the vineyard that will fight off the usual pests of grapes, but even just simple things like having cover crops between each row of vines. And again, just having pretty flowers between each of the rows encourages that increased biodiversity, helps improve the health of the soil and thus the vine and grape and the wine, and hopefully, depending on how much you drink, you. So hopefully that has helped to explain it just a little bit. But of course, we're going to go into these just in a little bit more depth. I think let's crack on with the first wine, if you are partaking. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Grüner Veltliner as a grape. It is Austria's signature white grape variety. It is also known as the groovy grape by the Austrians only. But it's a really good, dry, crisp, zesty style of Sauvignon Blanc. And throughout Austria, you probably wouldn't have thought that it is big on organic and biodynamic winemaking, but it really is. Actually, it's more of a drier continental climate than you might think. We think more sort of snow and ice and skiing and all of that when it comes to Austria. But actually, along the Danube River, especially in the area of Wachau, where this wine is from, it's surprisingly dry. So it's really good for encouraging better quality grapes without the use of lots of chemicals and lots of sprays. Having that good airflow from the river just means that there's less damp generating between each of the grapes. So these guys, the Domaine de Wachau, is actually a collection of quite a few families from around the region, because it's all very, very small production. And all from very steep production as well, as you can see. All from very, very small production. So they group together, but the guys in charge only want to work with winemakers that really care about the sustainability and caring about the environment. So I think there's about 250 families involved within the production. The vast majority of those are organic, but a lot of them don't have the certificate because it's such small production. They can't be bothered with the actual certificate itself, but they are practicing organic. So they're in that sustainable realm. The area of Wachau, as you can see, is beautiful, stunning, these fantastic steep slopes. Does mean that everything has to be done by hand. You're not really going to get any machines up these incredibly steep vineyards. So again, that is going to factor into the cost within these wines, and not only that extra care and attention, but the fact that everything does require that labor of love as well. But hopefully, if you do have this wine, taste-wise, Grüner for me always has this beautiful crisp green apple characteristic, and that gentle little bit of pepper and spice, that slight smokiness that comes through. And what you usually find is as the quality of the wine gets better, the vines themselves get older, and that sort of heading more towards that sustainable and organic style, those characteristics are just amplified. And you get more of that smokiness, more of that mineral element, that sort of whetstone and flint. Describing wine can sound a little pretentious, but
you've been licking pebbles again, Frank.
I have. I'm not encouraging that you go and run into your garden to lick whetstones to know what they taste like. Hopefully, now that I said it, you may start to pick it out a little bit in wine. All of these flavors are derived from the soil itself. So this very intense slate and limestone soil allows the vines to deep down really deep in search of all of the nutrients that it needs, and is reflected within that wine. So you get that steely, whetstone, flint, that mineral content within the wine. So yeah, hope you are enjoying this. As I said, if you do have any questions as we go through, feel free to put them into the chat. But yeah, I hope you are enjoying the first wine. Louise, are you?
I am, yeah. I love Grüner Veltliner. I did a post on our social about it yesterday, actually, as a nice alternative to Sauvignon Blanc. So if you're somebody that normally likes these really refreshing, dry whites that have got a nice zesty characteristic to them, then Grüner Veltliner is a really, really nice option. You know that it's always going to be dry. It's not like when we recommend Riesling to people, it comes in a variety of styles, because Austria is also famous for its Rieslings. Grüner is always dry, zesty. White pepper is a characteristic that I quite like with Grüner Veltliner. Sometimes, like Frank said, it's got a slightly fennelly characteristic to it as well. And I had a question about it on my recent wine exam. So
that was handy then.
That was handy. That I really like, Austrian wine. I think one thing to note about the practicing organic, I think, it's something I've seen written more in places recently. I was lucky enough to go to Boxy last week for a meal, which is based in Wapping Wharf in Bristol, and they actually really focus on sustainable, organic, biodynamic, etc. on their wine list, and they actually had PO written as practicing organic, as in some of them are very small producers and it's not commercially viable for them to get that expensive certificate, but they do, as Frank said, everything in the vineyard in the organic way. It's just I actually listened to an interesting podcast the other day, because I'm doing an essay at the moment on climate change and within the wine industry, and it was talking about, well, why should people that are practicing organic have to pay? Surely it should be everybody who isn't practicing organically are the ones that pay the penalty, I suppose, and everybody else gets the organic for free. That would encourage more people go in that direction. So it'd be interesting to see if that was something that, you know, comes to fruition at some point in the future when it's more viable, or if there's, you know, a new category created for climates like northwestern Spain, where there's loads and loads of rain. It's very difficult not to use fungicides, but the more research the better, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, because essentially we are returning to nature, returning to how wine used to be made, and yet that apparently is the niche, or the heavy levy is added onto that. And yeah, you're quite right, it should definitely be the other way around, and the people who are just spraying endless chemicals across their vineyard, they should be heavily taxed. Rant over. So the other thing about this wine that you may notice on the back of the label is that it is vegan. What do we mean by that? So it's just grapes, isn't it? So is a wine vegetarian or vegan? This is a real sort of hot topic at the moment, because you could argue at the end of the day, yes, it is all just grapes. There's nothing else added into that in the final product. but there is things used throughout the method of production which would state that the wine isn't vegetarian or vegan. So one of the main things when it comes to winemaking, once you've finished your fermentation, is you have all of the leftover yeast, the bits of stalk, sediment, whatever has been left over after that fermentation. So we do need to get rid of that, because when we have a nice glass of wine, it's clear, it's bright, it's not hazy in any way. So we want to remove all of that sediment. Now, historically, you would just keep it in its barrel or stainless steel tank or whatever, and just allow all of those particles to fall to the bottom. But that does take quite a long amount of time. So to fast track that method, is a method called fining. And this is binding all of those little particles together so that eventually, once we bottle the wine, it is clear and bright. And one of the most common ones of one of the most common fining agents is egg whites. And this is commonly used throughout the wine world, especially in areas like Bordeaux. All of those very top-end Bordeaux wines would always use a hefty amount of egg whites to bind together all of those particles. And it also helps bind together all of the sort of nasty, very bitter tannin within the wine, the positive charge within the tannin versus the negative charge within the egg whites. They bind together and filters out. So you actually end up with a slightly softer style of wine to start with. But obviously that is not suitable for vegans, because we have an animal product in there. It does get filtered out. So once we've done the fining, it would then go through many, many different filters and membranes to make sure that any small bits of particles have been removed, so that what you have in your bottle is 100% grape juice, or fermented grape juice. So there is nothing in the final product, but it is still part of the method of production. And, it goes through such sterile filtering towards the end that, there would be nothing left in. It's also one of the reasons why wine doesn't re-ferment. Don't want any exploding bottles. Everything is filtered out at that very end. So the wine technically is not vegan on that front. There are other things that you could use. PVPP, which is a type of plastic, not great for the environment. The other better choice is something like bentonite, which is a clay limestone sort of chalky material, a soil essentially, which works a bit like charcoal and filters out all of those particles. So if using that, then great, your wine is vegan. The issue that a lot of people are facing is that it's just not listed on labels. We have things like sulfites listed, alcohol units listed, but none of the actual whether this wine is vegetarian or vegan. And it's a real sort of issue, really. I do think that the wine laws should change to state whether a wine has been made vegetarian or vegan friendly.
I think it's difficult because in respect to we've been doing tastings with somebody who's allergic to egg whites, and so they have vegan wine as a way of ruling out the possibility. And it's a bit of a debate because they don't really have the technology or the time or the money to prove that there's not even 0.00001% of the fining product left in the wine. They have to state it on the label, especially if it's egg white, which is an allergen. So it's an interesting one because it's been in contact with it, but it's not actually in the wine. And I know a lot of people are vegan and aren't aware, and then I also know other people that are vegans and are aware but have more of an understanding of that process. And so it's
or are vegans but don't care when it comes to wine.
or that one. But it isn't always labelled up, as Frank said. With wine labels, there's so much information you need to cram on there these days, especially, and it depends which markets you're in. And actually in the UK, we're very aware of the vegan diet. You go to somewhere like France and it's not as popular, it's not as widely spread, and therefore they don't see it as important, and they don't see it as something that would sell their wine. They don't want their wine to be known or be sold by the fact that it's vegan. They want it to be sold by the fact that it's a good wine, and so some people get a bit stubborn, and which can make it difficult to know where you're up to. There is a good wine website I found called Barnivore, which essentially lists all vegan drinks products if you search for things on there, which is an interesting one. But yeah,
it's a growing list.
It is a growing list, and the more people get savvy to it, the more people are letting us know, because sometimes it's down to us. If we're putting wines on tasting, sometimes we have to go to the producer and say, or or go to our buyers and say, can you confirm that this wine is vegan, because I can't see the details anywhere. So it's not always easy to determine, but it's definitely a hot topic.
I should say, so that's the sort of vegan side. Vegetarian, one of the other finding agents is isinglass or gelatin. Not really used in that many areas these days, thankfully. More egg whites or the bentonite, which is step in the right direction, so we say. You can also find a lot of wine that has not done any filtering or fining. And it's usually labeled as such, so if you ever see unfiltered or unfined wine, then at least, again, you can buy confidence knowing that it is vegan friendly, because they haven't done any of that process. Because it is thought that the more you treat the wine, the more you remove, also the more flavor you remove. So for a lot of producers, they won't bother with that. They'll just rack off the top part of the barrel and leave all that sediment at the bottom. And just that's waste, and that's fine. I think it is also part of the consumer issue, is that we like to drink wine to the very last drop. We don't want any wastage in the bottom of the bottle. We're going to shake it, get every last drop out. Whereas really, there should be a little bit of sediment in some of those reds, which would, be that indication that it hasn't gone through extreme filtering and fining. So
sometimes they just let gravity do the work. And that's where you see natural winemaking come into play. Again, a term that's kind of difficult to define sometimes. It's got no legal definition, but it essentially means minimal intervention, and doing as little to the wine once you've got the grapes into the winery as possible. Essentially, they can go a bit funky, they can be a bit unusual, they can be delicious and really elegant, they can be unpredictable, I think, is what I'm trying to say. But on that point, in terms of organic, is there an international standard? It's interesting, because no, not really. In America, to be organic, there's actually far fewer practicing organic wineries in America, because they are much stricter on the sulfites and the addition of those in the winery. It has to be tiny amounts, because what you'll find is the sulfites added in the winery prevents the wine reacting with oxygen, and so they stabilize it, and they mean it's bottled and it has a bit of longevity. So you have to be very confident your product is hygienic and stable in order to practice organic somewhere like America. So there are governing bodies, people like EcoCert. I don't know if that's on one of these ones. I think that's what the Bégude is. Oh no, they're AB, which is the French one. But yeah, there's different. Biovine. Yeah. So in various countries, there's different ones. Around Europe, I would say it's pretty consistent. But if you go to other countries, there's no international guide, as it were. So yeah, it's worth doing your research, because sometimes it can be hard to know, even when you've got the terms on the bottle.
Well, there is this amazing book which goes into extreme detail about all things organic biodynamic, and gives you the nitty-gritty of all of the different countries' regulations and stipulations. But it does also have a very extensive list of all of the top producers around the world that are practicing organic and biodynamic. So if you are keen on that, there it is again. Very good book to purchase. Sales pitch over for someone else. Should we talk about your rosé?
We shall. We should, and we shall. If you are sat in the sunshine, or you have sunshine coming through the room, then hopefully this rosé is going to go down really, really well. Obviously, pale Provence rosés very much on trend at the moment. This one's a nice kind of orangey pink, really super pale, and that normally tells us it's going to be dry. Not always the case. In wine, there's anomalies to every rule, but as a general rule, people go for the paler, the better. And this doesn't necessarily mean it's not got bags of flavor. I think this one definitely does have bags of flavor. Lots and lots of red fruit, I think. A bit of wild strawberry, maybe a bit of peach or something like that, but stone fruit. But Provence Rosé can have this nice herbaceous note to it as well. And like Frank said earlier, those flavors are really pure, they're really clean, they're really fresh. And I think when it comes to organic farming, that's really what they're coaxing out of the grapes. They're getting the best possible flavor out of those grapes. So this winery are based, I just want to paint the picture as you sip this rosé, or you look at me sipping a rosé. They've described their vineyard like a balcony over the sea. So there's 22 hectares of vines sitting on these hillsides in the south of France, overlooking the Mediterranean, brushed by the wind. So they've got a Mistral wind there, which helps really to move the air around the vines, and that actually reduces the amount of fungal disease, reduces the risk, of fungal disease. So actually in the south of France, we see, I think it's about double the national average of organic and sustainable winemaking practices, because they have lots of intense sunshine and then a nice breeze, which means mold, mildew, they don't really have a chance to form in this area. So that's why we see larger amounts of them there. And they also have quite sunny days, but at a little bit of altitude, quite cool nights, which obviously if you think it's warm in the evening as well, that's also going to promote various things happening. But you can see there, it's kind of avoiding monoculture. So I think that's one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, really. When it comes to vineyards, sometimes we imagine these vineyards and we think straight rows of vines on gravel, and that's it. Whereas what we want to do, like Frank mentioned, increase the biodiversity. And in the Languedoc and Provence, you get these lovely bushy herbs growing everywhere. We call them garrigue. Tends to be things like lavender and rosemary and sage, and especially if you're drinking Côte de Rhône and other reds from the area, you might think that translates into the wine. But I think hopefully you're starting to get a picture of where you know, if you look at organic vineyard, we did a tasting back in November with various producers. We normally do a large event in Bristol, but we connected to the producers directly wherever they were around the world. And we did actually talk about climate change quite a lot. And the common theme was that if you are practicing organically, you will tend to find that you can spot those vineyards even in bad years when the weather's not been favorable, because it's not just that farming organically is better for the vines, it means you're getting this real attention to detail because you're preventing rather than curing, which means you are constantly monitoring, looking out for the health of the grapes and the vines, and that really translates to better quality fruits and therefore better quality wine. And in the years where, you know, things aren't going so well, you might have been a quite rainy spring and into the summer, and if you're using lots of sprays and things, you're not going to have good quality fruit because you're not really encouraging a healthy atmosphere for it to grow in. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this rosé. I hope you are too. And it's nice to drink wine when you know your moral stance is being appreciated too. And I think, you know, if you are buying in terms of prices, unfortunately, the cost that comes from organic, biodynamic, you are looking more at £8 to £10 as a starting point, really, than the average price of a bottle in the UK is more like £6. So drink less, but drink better, and you'll find that you enjoy it more and it lasts longer in the glass. Hopefully, that's my theory.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
So, I mean, that nicely leads on, Louise, to the next topic of climate change and how that is affecting the wine trade. Conveniently, this is Louise's diploma essay that she needs to write. So this is good practice for her.
You can do diplomas in wine. It is a thing. And the fact actually that, so WSET, Wine and Spirit Educational Trust, they have set this as the question. And it's, you know, what is the wine industry doing not only to mitigate the impact, because obviously we've got transport, we've got CO2 being created, what are they doing to capture the CO2? There's my mind is buzzing. Obviously, I won't try and cram it all into now. But it's also appreciating that I'm for Germany. What I'm reading about at the moment, it's a blessing and a challenge. And if you look at the UK wine industry, it is meaning that we can grow grapes in areas that were traditionally too cold, more of a marginal climate. You couldn't get the ripeness, you didn't have enough sunshine and warmth throughout the summer to get ripe grapes, so the wine would just be pretty awful. But it's unseasonal weather. That is the biggest impact. Often people think climate change, warmer temperatures, riper grapes, growing grapes in different regions, and maybe where previous regions have been quite warm, they might struggle to keep the alcohol down. Places like Château in the Rhone, they're struggling sometimes, 15-16% alcohol. There are things you can do in the vineyard to mitigate it, but yeah, it can be a good thing for some industries, but everywhere is expecting unseasonal weather. So I don't know if you've got the slide of the hail, Frank. I don't know if you've got the image of that on this one, but we had.
I don't know.
If you Google it, in April, we had a lot of cold weather, and hail and frost were really damaging the vines, and you could actually see grape growers. Sorry, my mind's half French sometimes. So vigneron in French means grape growers and the winemaker. It's kind of all seen as one, but we split it in English. So they were in the vineyards monitoring the vines because these tiny green buds had just burst out of the vines. They're very fragile, and they were very susceptible to damage from frost and from hail. And so this is, where we struggle with it a little bit. They were lighting fires in the vineyards with giant wax candles to warm the air around the vines up, so they weren't then going to have any frost damaging the vines, but then also kind of adding to something you're trying to mitigate. So there are alternatives, which I googled after Frank mentioned it to me. Giant cannons of air. Care to elaborate, Frank?
Yeah, so throughout areas like Bordeaux and Piedmont in the northwest of Italy, when they see hail clouds starting to form, there are literally giant cannons. I'm not like taller than a building, giant cannons that just shoot vibrations into the sky, and the clouds disperse. And it sounds like thunder going off. I was there in Bordeaux, and I could just hear this distant thunder, but it was quite rhythmic. So what is that noise? And just giant cannons. And if we didn't have those or didn't have other protective measures, then if that hail did hit those vines, and it is typically just before harvest when the grapes are super ripe and full of all their juice and ready to burst, hail hits, you've lost your crop. Those skins will burst, the disease will get in and just ruin everything. So having these giant sort of eyesores of cannons actually does, it's not harmful to the environment. They're quite safe on that front, and you save your crop. The other things that you could do is have netting over all of your grapes. That's quite costly and would need to be done every year, and would need to be taken back and on and off, and very, very labor intensive. So there's many things that you can do, but as you can imagine, the more we do, the more it costs. But I mean, climate change is affecting pretty much every wine growing region. As you said, Louise, even within the UK, they believe that there'll be Merlot planted in Norfolk by 2030.
I remember when we started saying that fact. 2030 feels a lot closer now. Yeah,
and it's happening. The increase of amount of English reds being made. You go back 20 years, they weren't around. We only focused on sparkling wine, whereas now the still wine being production is massively increasing. But there was that producer in Alsace, Botgai, who said that we are no longer inheriting the land from our parents, but stealing it from our children. So more care needs to be taken, and there's certain things that we can definitely do to try and mitigate that.
And there are plenty of things that could be done in the vineyard. You will see traditional vineyard areas creeping to higher altitude to mitigate the effect of warmer temperatures, because the higher you go in altitude, the cooler things get, the cooler the nights. And that's important for wine, because you need grapes to have the chance to kind of cool down, because it preserves acidity. And a wine that doesn't have good acidity is not balanced. So you might find that traditional winemaking areas might be struggling to hold on to that acidity. And we're starting to see grapes from warmer regions being grown in regions that haven't traditionally planted them. For example, in Bordeaux, where grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot really dominate most of the plantings, they've permitted some grapes from Portugal. So an area like the Douro, which is where we get most of our port from, very steep, terraced, very beautiful vineyards, hot, dry, arid. These grapes can cope with drought. And if you want to get into the nerd, there's different clones of lots of different grapes. And so there's research and science that can be applied to select clones of these grapes that are the best adapted to suiting with drought, or cope the best. They have slightly thicker skins, which means they aren't as damaged by sun, because grapes can get sunburn. So there are lots of things that can be done to mitigate the temperatures. But like Frank said, with the unseasonal weather, I don't think I would like to be a vigneron anytime soon, because that much of your livelihood depending on the weather when it's so unpredictable.
I think
that's after anybody who does it.
Especially an area like Bordeaux that's so steeped in tradition has finally realized and has introduced these new grapes, which is a huge step forward for the wine world. If Bordeaux can do it, the rest of the world can do it. But really, they shouldn't be. As you said, we've seen that increase of alcohol, but it's that delicate balance between having the right amount of alcohol, but actually the fruit ripeness as well. You're not just trying to accumulate the sugar, you're actually trying to make sure that the grapes themselves are ripe, the phenolic ripeness of the actual fruit flavors, because otherwise you just end up with, as you said, those big, bold, boozy, flabby wines, and that's not always great.
You might not think of it, flabby is actually a technical wine word for a wine that has just not got acidity, and therefore it's not got structure, and it kind of just goes, huh.
Yeah, I wasn't being mean about wine. Okay, so Louise, if you could introduce the red as well, please.
Yes, of course. We actually did this on one of our monthly Zoom tastings, and it was very, very popular. Now, Lebanon is the country that we're heading to here. We are actually at altitude already, so the vineyards for this are grown about the same height as English mountains, about 1,000 meters or so above sea level. So we do get cooling influence from that altitude, helping to slow down the ripening period.
Just one nerdy fact: for every 100 meters you go above sea level, the average temperature drops by 0.6 degrees. Moving on.
It's one to take to the next dinner party. So in terms of this winery, they've been going a very decent amount of time. To put it into context, so Lebanon, they only produce 7 million bottles of wine a year. France does 8 billion. So it's actually tiny. If anybody else has watched all of those videos of what really does a billionaire look like, and they've got all of the grains of rice, etc., then yeah, it's a large difference. And in terms of production, they're not huge, but they definitely do tend to focus on the more natural side of things, very in tune with nature there. And this winery actually, on site, the architecture of the building takes into account the sustainability. So it's a very ancient building, and the vats are concrete, and they're actually built into the winery building, and there's air holes which help, because fermentation is a chemical reaction. It means everything heats up, so you need to cool it down in order to stop the wine kind of getting too hot and excited, and you get loads of jammy flavors. So they've built vents into the side of the building. There's an old Roman vat, so it's actually the site of ancient winemaking in Lebanon. There's history everywhere you look, but they have clearly stuck to the traditional method as we go through. It's very authentic. And I think what's interesting about this wine, in that natural approach, is they do use concrete, which means they're not using oak. And so what you'll find, if you aren't perhaps normally a fan of red wine, or you want something when it's a bit warmer, this wine is very pure in terms of its fruit flavor. It's very, very fresh, I think, in terms of the fruits that you get is quite bright red fruits. It's got a bit of spice, maybe a little bit that mineral character that Frank was talking about at the start, but like juicy red currant, raspberry, things like that. And when I say they're natural in their ethos, it's every step of the way. So right down to the fact that when you're fermenting grapes, you can add in cultured yeast, so yeast that's kind of been curated to get the best out of grapes, or you can use indigenous yeast, which is essentially found kind of in the atmosphere and on the skins of grapes, and so they use indigenous yeasts. It can be more unpredictable because you're not controlling it, so it can produce interesting flavors, and often people will opt for that if they are, I don't want to say a fine winemaker, but a quality conscious winemaker. There we go. The soils in the vineyard, they're dry farmed, which means they're not using irrigation in terms of spraying. Even though we're in a warm area, they're not using sprinklers. They do use a little bit of snow melt water from the mountains. This one actually uses an organic vegetarian fining agent. So minimal addition of sulfur, very gentle filtration, organic vegetarian agent. They don't specify which one, which means it's not vegan, but it is vegetarian. So I'm assuming
organic eggs.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I just think it's a very good example of how to do things in harmony with the environment. And it doesn't stop there. It's not just everything in the winery, it's afterwards. They recycle everything. They collect their own used bottles and reprocess them in the production cycle. Any plastic and cartons that they use, they take to a local NGO, which works with disabled people, who then sell the items to a recycling centre to raise funds for their projects. And even the residue of the fermented grapes are transformed into fertilizers, natural fertilizers for the vineyards. So sometimes when we talk about sustainability, I think it's easy to think, right, we're in the vineyard. For me, sustainability and sustainable practices also encompass, what's the word I'm looking for? Encompass, I'll go with that one. The local community and the local environment, right down to the soils, but also the bigger picture. You know, do they have land? Some of these wineries have animals grazing, so the land is multi-use, multi-purpose. There's so much more that can be done. If you're farming on a big scale and just thinking about profit, it's not on your mindset at all. But I think this is such a great example of every little detail. And sometimes if you go to a winery's website, you can find, I know, for example, Camel Valley in the UK, they have a sustainability document, which is their commitment to what they do in the environment, in the community, even with their staff members. So it goes further than just the vines with sustainability. And I think that's a focus for me when I am looking for purchasing wines.
Absolutely. However, I should state, if you do have these wines, just recycle the bottles locally. Don't send them back to Lebanon.
Don't know if they collect from here, because that might not be is environmentally friendly. Where does it say it's organic? So, oops, don't. This one
thing. Isn't. This is sustainable.
Right.
Yeah.
So they organic. They practice organically. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've not got the certification, but you know, as you just heard, everything they do is in harmony with the environment, but not paying for it. They're not not huge wineries, so that might be the reason why. Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of facts about that winery, but hopefully
that's great. So finally, is organic and biodynamic wine worth the extra money? Yes. So, yeah.
I don't know if you're talking about some of the most expensive wines in the world, which are actually biodynamic, like Domaine de Romani Conti.
Romani Conti, Lefebvre, Ponte Canet in Bordeaux. Yeah, these wines will set you back hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. So they can afford that extra care and attention and labour within the vineyard. I think on a sort of everyday drinking experience, more care, more attention has gone into making that wine, so it should be a little bit more costly. And as I said at the beginning, having that slightly more fine-tuned expression of those wines, I think you are getting what you pay for. I think it's difficult, as we've said, like it's about the scale of the winery. Those larger wineries who are quality conscious, they can keep those costs a little bit lower by making more. We'll edit this bit out, but Connoisseur, big Chilean producer, available in all good supermarkets. Edit out. That is all organic. So costs can be reduced if done on a large scale, if the winemaker and the vine grower do care about the production. But yeah, we tend to find that those smaller producers, the focus is more about sustainability. So farming sustainably, making wine sustainability, and as you said, Louise, just doing the whole package, encompassing everything of really caring for the entire product from soil to what you put in your glass and you actually drink.
I think it's often very easy to overlook what's behind a product, and with wine, me and Frank are obviously super nerd level, and we go into the nth degree of detail. So it makes you appreciate, when people are taking the time to do things properly, because it can be very time consuming, what the end result is. And I think we did a fine wine tasting last night over Zoom, and it was quite interesting. We picked all the wines, and mine and Frank's favorite wines, and then we looked at it and was like, oh, these are all organic. What does that say about potentially people producing wine that costs more money, are able to fund the organic certification, or is it that their wines have reached that level of quality, which means that's down to the organic practices?
Oliver's asked the question, is it a common request for people to ask for organic wine? When I started in the shop, which admittedly was 10 years ago, it wasn't so much. And if anything, a lot of winemakers kind of saw it as a bit of a gimmick, whereas it's just accelerated over the last few years. So many more producers are actually becoming more conscious of what they are doing to their vines and to their wines. So we are seeing so many more people request it because of it. It does produce nicer, fresher, more precise wine. And yeah, we are seeing a lot more people ask.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used to work in Stroud in a Majestic wine, and I mean, Stroud is a very green focused town, I would say. And so we tended to get more requests there than other areas of stores I worked in, but it's definitely on the increase. And now I think you'll find a lot of places making it easier to search via organic, vegan, vegetarian, etc., rather than just having to go through all the wines and individually check. Now you've got the different search functions, so hopefully that makes it easier for you guys, really.
Well, that's kind of our bit. I hope you've enjoyed it and learnt a little bit. Hopefully you've still got some wine left that you can enjoy over the next couple of days. Just one sort of final passing bit. If you did enjoy the virtual tasting experience, just a little plug on our side. We are doing another tasting on Wednesday, the 30th of June, 4 wines, 60 quid a head. And we'll be tasting through a variety of tasty summer wines that me and Louise have selected. So fizz, a white and 2 reds to enjoy. And you can check our website, averys.com/events for that one. So hopefully we'll see you again then. But if there have been any questions that you haven't been able to throw at us this evening, then do feel free to send us an email. It's a nice, easy one to remember. It's just events@averys.com, which I believe, there we go, Louise was typing as I was saying. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it sounds like the wines have gone down well, so I'm glad it's been appreciated.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm used to these claps these days, the Zoom clap.
Real one.
Real one.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and yeah, we'll leave you in peace and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank
you so much, Frank and Louise. That was really fascinating. Yeah, it's been amazing to hear about the impact of, particularly of like making organic and sustainable wine on taste and the impact that has, you know, as well as being amazing for the environment. So that's been really, really fascinating. So thank you both so much.
More than welcome. Take care. Enjoy, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.